Chicago, October 1st, 1932. Wrigley Field. Something had been building in the air since morning. Something unspeakable. Something that could be felt but not named. The Cubs' dugout was talking, shouting, laughing, using Ruth's name in every way imaginable. The crowd was joining them. 50,000 voices, one target, Babe Ruth. And every time Ruth came to the plate, the same thing happened. Insults, slurs, humiliations that went beyond baseball and into something more personal, more deliberate, more organized. And Ruth smiled. Every single time, the same smile, an unchanging smile. But those who knew that smile well understood something the crowd didn't. That smile didn't come from happiness. It came from something far more dangerous. It came from a man who had already decided what he was going to do, who was simply waiting for the right moment to do it. The fifth inning began. Ruth walked to the plate. And on that field, on that afternoon, the most silent and most devastating revenge in baseball history began. To understand what happened at Wrigley Field on October 1st, 1932, you need to understand what had been happening for days before it. The World Series between the Yankees and the Cubs had not been ordinary from the moment it began. There was bad blood that predated the first pitch. Real bad blood. Not the manufactured rivalry of teams who meet in October. Something more personal and more specific. The Cubs had a former Yankees player named Mark Koenig on their roster. Koenig had joined Chicago mid-season, had hit .353 in 33 games, had been instrumental in helping the Cubs reach the World Series. And when the Cubs voted on how to divide their series money among the players, they gave Koenig a half share. Not a full share, half. Because he was new. Because he hadn't been there the whole season. Because that was the calculation they made. The Yankees heard about it. Ruth heard about it. And Ruth, who had a specific and unwavering code about how teammates were treated, was furious in the way that Ruth was furious. Loudly, publicly, without diplomatic softening, he called the Cubs cheap. Said it to reporters. Said it in press conferences. Said it in terms that made it into newspapers across the country. The Cubs heard everything. And the Cubs, who had their own pride and their own code, decided that what Ruth had said required a response. Their response was organizational, was collective, was the specific kind of response that a team gives when it decides to make one man's experience on a baseball field as unpleasant as possible. The Lemons arrived first, during warm-ups before Game 3. Cubs players, positioned near the dugout, threw them onto the field near Ruth as he moved through his pre-game routine. Not one lemon, multiple, aimed, deliberate, a statement that said, "We know you're here, and we have decided how we feel about it." Ruth picked one up, looked at it, then bit into it while the crowd watched, chewed it slowly, made eye contact with the Cubs' dugout, smiled. The crowd didn't know what to make of it. The Cubs' dugout made of it exactly what Ruth intended. A declaration that the Lemons weren't going to do what they were designed to do. That Ruth was not rattleable by fruit, or by anything else they had available. That smile established the terms of what was coming. The terms were simple. You can throw everything you have at me today, and I am going to enjoy it. The verbal assault began in earnest when the game started. Guy Bush was the primary architect. Bush was the Cubs pitcher not starting that day, which meant his job was to watch from the dugout and be available. He decided his contribution would be commentary. Sustained, specific, personal commentary directed at Ruth from the dugout steps, with the full volume of a professional athlete in a ballpark designed to carry sound. What Bush said has been described variously by witnesses. The newspapers of the era were selective in what they printed. What is certain is that it covered Ruth's weight, his age, his lifestyle, his fitness for competition, and a range of additional topics that had nothing to do with baseball. Other Cubs players joined. The dugout became a chorus. 50,000 Cubs fans provided the orchestral backing. And Ruth stood in the batter's box and received it all with that same smile. That same unchanging, dangerous smile. His wife Claire was in the stands. This mattered. Ruth's relationship with Claire was the most stable thing in his turbulent life. He was loyal to her, protective of her, and the crowd, which had no limits on this October afternoon, had directed things at her box as well. Not just at Ruth, but at Claire. At the woman sitting in the stands, who had nothing to do with the baseball game, and everything to do with being married to Babe Ruth. Ruth saw it, heard it, filed it, added it to the calculation that was running silently behind the smile. The smile never changed, but the calculation was complete by the third inning. What was going to happen was already decided. The only question was when the pitch would arrive that gave him the opportunity. First at bat, Ruth hit a 3-run home run in the first inning. Not the famous one. This one was the opening statement. The one that said the assault from the dugout, and the crowd was noted, and this was the first response. Running the bases, Ruth did not celebrate, did not gesture, did not engage with the dugout or the crowd. He simply ran at his characteristic unhurried pace, touching each base with the methodical quality of a man doing something he has done thousands of times, crossed home plate, and returned to the dugout. The Cubs' dugout went louder. The crowd went louder. A home run was not enough. Ruth was not going to be enough. They had more available. The noise continued. The Lemons had been a warm-up. The first inning had been a response. The fifth inning was going to be something else entirely. Something that none of them saw coming, even though it happened in front of all of them. Fifth inning. Score tied at 4. The noise at Wrigley Field had reached the specific register of a crowd that believes it has power, that believes what it's doing is working, that believes the man at the plate is feeling what they intend him to feel. Charlie Root was pitching. Root was good. Root was experienced. Root had been through October before. The first pitch came in. Strike. The Cubs' dugout erupted. Bush was at maximum volume. The crowd surged. 1 strike. Ruth was 1 strike closer to a failure that would validate everything that had been said about him all afternoon. Ruth stepped out of the box. He looked at Root. He looked at the Cubs' dugout. He held up 1 finger toward Root. 1, acknowledging the strike. Then he looked at the crowd. Let them have their moment. Let the volume peak. Then he raised his hand, extended 1 finger, and pointed, not at Root, not at the dugout, at the center field bleachers, 440 feet away, in the deepest part of Wrigley Field, the most difficult target a right-handed power hitter could name. Subscribe right now if you've ever watched someone make a promise with a smile. Hit like if you already know what happened next. And drop a comment. Do you think Ruth really called it? Because what happened in the next 4 seconds is the most debated moment in baseball history. The silence lasted exactly 1 second. The kind of silence that a crowd produces when it doesn't know what to make of what it just saw. Then the noise came back, louder than before, angrier than before. Because what Ruth had just done was either the most arrogant gesture in the history of sport or the most confident. The crowd chose arrogant. The Cubs' dugout chose arrogant. Bush chose arrogant. Root chose the pitch, a curveball, well located. The kind of pitch that works in exactly this situation, against exactly this kind of hitter, in exactly this kind of moment. The pitch that said whatever you're pointing at, it doesn't matter because this ball is going to a different place entirely. Ruth swung. The contact was not the contact of a man guessing. It was the contact of a man who had waited for a specific pitch in a specific location and found it. The ball left the bat with the sound that anyone who has ever been near a perfectly struck baseball immediately recognizes. Not a crack. Something deeper. Something that carries differently than routine contact. Something that the outfielders in center field turned to watch before the ball had cleared the infield because the sound told them what the flight path would be. The ball went to center field. Deep center. Going. 440 feet. Gone. The crowd went to a place beyond sound. 50,000 people experiencing something that exists outside the normal emotional range of a baseball game. The Cubs' dugout went silent for the first time all series. Bush, who had been the loudest voice in that dugout all afternoon, stood on the dugout steps with nothing left to say. Root walked off the mound without looking back. He would spend decades denying that Ruth had called it. The denial itself became part of the story. Ruth ran the bases. The same unhurried pace. The same methodical touching of each base. Crossing home plate, he looked at the Cubs' dugout, at Bush specifically, and he smiled. The same smile he had been wearing all afternoon. The smile that had been misread all afternoon as amusement or theatrics, or the performance of a man pretending the assault wasn't landing. Now the crowd understood what the smile had actually been. It had never been amusement. It had never been performance. It had been certainty. The quiet, absolute certainty of a man who had known since the lemons and warmups exactly how this afternoon was going to end, who had absorbed every insult, every shout, every lemon, every word directed at Claire in the stands, and had filed all of it behind a smile while the calculation ran. The calculation that ended with one finger pointed at center field and one pitch sent exactly there. Lou Gehrig hit a home run on the very next pitch. Back to back, the Yankees led 6-4. The Cubs never recovered. New York won the game, won the series in 4 games. Complete sweep. The called shot, if it was a called shot, and the debate about whether Ruth truly pointed at the bleachers or was gesturing at Root or the Cubs' dugout, has continued for 90 years without resolution, became the defining image of a career that had no shortage of defining images. Ruth himself never gave a consistent answer. To some reporters he confirmed it completely. To others he smiled and said, "What do you think?" He understood that the ambiguity was more powerful than the confirmation, that a story with a question mark lives longer than a story with a period. He had done it. The ball had gone to center field, and whether the finger had pointed there or somewhere else, the result was identical. Ruth had smiled at 50,000 people who hated him, had absorbed everything they had pointed somewhere, and had sent the ball exactly there. The smile was the story. The smile had always been the story. The home run was just the punctuation. Babe Ruth never played in another World Series. 1932 was the last. The body that had survived decades of impossible choices was beginning to present its final accounting. He retired in 1935, with numbers that would stand for generations, and a reputation that transcended numbers entirely. But of everything he did, the records, the championships, the mythology that accumulated around him like weather, the image that endures most completely is from Wrigley Field on October 1st, 1932. A man pointing at the bleachers with 2 strikes against him, and 50,000 hostile witnesses, and the Cubs' dugout at maximum volume, and then the ball going exactly where the finger had pointed. Whether he called it or not, whether the smile was theater or truth, the ball went to center field. That much is not in dispute. That much has never been in dispute. And for Babe Ruth, that was always enough. The smile said what the record said, and what the finger said, and what the ball said when it landed 440 feet away. Don't tell me what I can't do. Watch me do it.